President Trump struck this record deal on the world stage, striking this landmark trade and tariff deal with the European Union. And with us to take a deeper dive into all of this is Michael Austin, a Project 21 ambassador and president of Knowledge and Decisions Economic Consulting. So, Michael, welcome to the program and take us inside the big deal, please.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So, as you said, last week, President Trump made a historic deal with the European Union to, of course, open up new markets for American businesses, as well as give Americans greater access to European goods and services. At the same time, he also, of course, renegotiated tariffs, of course, with with the European Union. Now, I'll be honest, as an economist, I am not a fan of tariffs. I don't like that. I'm a fan of international trade deals, though. They help American families get more for less. They help American businesses grow by selling more to customers. My only contention is, why get it for a 15% tariff when you could get a 0% tariff? Because, of course, tariffs are tax increases. So as long as we, of course, make a good deal about punishing our allies and more about, making sure it's easier for a business to run their operations or just for a family to live, I'm all about that. So by all means, let's continue to make Americans more free and more better off. I just don't wish we had tariffs as a part of it.
All right, folks. So we are having a little audio problem here. But Michael, I cannot thank you enough for joining us. And I do have a few questions for you because I know specifically Switzerland was crying and melting down over the weekend because they have always prided themselves on their neutrality and not being part of the party, if you will. And they feel very penalized right now. Obviously, it's a small country. And they're, as they said, everyone could buy a Harley Davidson in Switzerland, and they're not going to make up for that trade deal. They were looking at investing in the U.S. But kind of walk us through in a scenario like that. But then also, please walk us through the situation of essentially, we have general guideposts, right? We see 15% for the EU. We see 10% for the UK. We see some exclusions on steel and aluminum for the UK. But at what point do you think we will see all of this written down on paper so people understand it precisely?
Oh, that's a really good point. I'm sure that they'll all be written down on paper eventually. But unfortunately, that's just kind of the whole kit and caboodle. When you have a massive deal, whether it's with the EU or whether it's with China or Brazil or any other nation, there are going to be a lot of exclusions. There are going to be a lot of interested parties that don't want to pay whatever that tariff rate will be set. So I hope that it will get written down. What I just don't want is a Swiss cheese, right, of sorts of different exclusions. I mean, just think about it in terms of national tax policy or state tax policy, right? The more holes or exclusions that you have in a tax code, the higher you need to raise that rate. When in reality, you could just lower the rate, have no exclusions, and then, everybody's arguably better off. And then as for Switzerland, Switzerland, of course, they tried to stay largely out of it, thinking that they could do their own deal. But when you're dealing with a powerhouse that's the American economy, the EU, of course, said either get on board or get lost. But I still think that there are plenty of opportunities for the Swiss to, of course, not only gain for their own people, but of course for Americans to capitalize on that economy, of course, and make sure that everyone's better off.
Do you think there's a chance that any of these European countries would agree to all of this investment in the United States if President Trump wasn't pressuring them and demanding them and using some leverage to decrease our trade imbalance?
I think they still would. And the reason why is because the American economy is still the number one economy in the world, right? So whether we had this trade deal or not, it's still a really good investment for you to put some dollars into, an American factory or to grow your own business here. And President Trump has realized that out of all the, almost all the presidents that we've had in this modern day. And so he's using that economic leverage to say, if you want to come to the table, if you want a piece of the American market, you have to go through me. And frankly, I think that's exactly what a president should do.
Point there. Let's go ahead and play clip number 5 so we can react to it.
Donald Trump's second term so far, sir.
I feel like this is one of the first presidents that's actually doing what they said they was going to do. Like most people go on their campaign trail, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and they get in office and they don't do none of that. But like he's doing everything he said he was going to do.
Well,
And
no,
it's
not
I feel
necessarily.
like it's right for the country.
Because
Go ahead.
he said on day one he was going to bring the price of groceries down. He said on day one he was going to bring inflation down. You know, he said that he won the election on one word, which was groceries. I mean, clearly people aren't feeling that relief yet in their pockets.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I work for a bank.
Okay.
But okay, so everybody know in your right mind, there's no way somebody could do something instantly. But in terms of what has happened within this year, it's crazy. Like it's it's no way that you could see the last 4 years and how garbage it was, and then look at just this first half of the year and think stuff is not going in a positive direction.
I'm holding my president accountable to the things that he said he was going to do, and those things haven't
Okay,
been done yet.
I got you. He said he was going to bring stuff down instantly, do this instantly. Okay,
He said he was going. He said he was going to end all the wars immediately, day one. He said he was going to do these things on day one.
Got you. So you want to be literal to that sense? Cool. I understand. You're right. He didn't do all of these things instantly, but I feel like everything is going in the right direction as planned. Did you talk about the European deal? Did you talk about stuff that is happening in a positive direction? It's like I feel like the issue and I've never considered myself to be a Republican or anything like that. Like everybody grew up as we supposed to be Democrats. That's how everybody grew up. I'm from Detroit, but when you get a little older, you actually look at things that happen, look at things that people saying versus what they do. I can't roll on the Democratic train no more. Like it's a bunch of people saying stuff that don't even make sense.
Well, what has he done?
On the other end,
you just got like what has he done then? Like, because the question was, how would you rate his presidency this far? So give us some things that he has done, then shed light on it for us.
Yeah, you haven't told us nothing he's done. You said the European deal. The crazy thing about the European deal, the tariff last year was like 1.5%. Now it's 15. So how does increased tariffs help us? Okay.
So do you think that other countries should be able to tariff us, but we don't tariff nobody else? Like that makes sense to you?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
I
have a low IQ.
Exactly. Okay. So other countries have been putting tariffs on our country, but we have been giving people no tariff.
Yes.
This is the first time since the 30s that we're actually bringing in billions of dollars from tariffs.
Okay.
And
but
I feel like that's a positive for our country.
But we fit the bill for that. We
that
the people
affects us.
Like we the people fit the bill for those
tariffs.
tariffs.
No, that's not true either.
I can't have this conversation with you if you're not going to be honest, sir.
No. I'm being 100% honest. So if you look at the actual facts, other people are accounting for those tariffs in the sense of those businesses they're not raising our prices. They are taking the hit on them.
To watch that much The Breakfast Club, but I want to get your take on that, and I also want to get your take on something slightly, adjacent to it because you're an economist, and it is the need for deflation in order to help people get comfortable again with spending. But let's talk about the tariffs first and what you thought of that conversation there about some of the foreign companies taking on at least part of the tariff burden by lowering their profit margins, and will this ultimately end up impacting us in our wallets?
That's a good question. So I guess how I would characterize it is I'm somewhat in the middle of that conversation there. I'm definitely not a panicking. If you see anybody telling you that tariffs are going to create massive inflation and wreck the whole economy, they're casting their pearls before the swine. That's most certainly not true. honestly, trade is just such a relatively small part of the national economy that even if you have a 15% tariff, it's not going to crater everything. However, what I do want to say is that, tariffs do raise relative prices, right? Especially for imported goods or any industry that's relying on foreign input, like aluminum, steel, semiconductors, whatever you name it. And so, yeah, when those relative prices rise, American businesses and families, they do feel it. But I think what I also want to say is that this is nothing new. I mean, President Trump has, been an advocate for this type of trade policy going back to Trump 1.0. So, I most certainly voted for him knowing that that was going to be the case because I knew that the other things that he was going to put in place would still skyrocket the American economy, that, no one's perfect. No one's going to agree with me 100%. I was okay with this. So watching that clip was a bit of an eyebrow because I said, well, we all knew this was coming. But then at the same time, you don't necessarily want to get deflation, right? Because while deflation means a decrease in the price for, let's say, those who are owing a lot of debt, that means they might owe more money than they did previously. So, I go back to the old Reagan type theory. If you're going to have inflation, let's have it low, let's have it steady, let's have it predictable. I don't think that tariffs are going to create massive amounts of inflation. We haven't really seen it yet. And in fact, if you look at the last 6 months, inflation has been going down relative to Joe Biden. So I would say the economy can most certainly stand these types of trade deals simply because trade and tariff policy is not such a large aspect of American growth.
Now, let me just ask one more question. This is about the deflation, and the reason is because Nicolai and I, we have this debate all the time. I want to ask, because you make a very good point with the debt, but here's the other question. The thing that makes me interested in it is that because we had so much inflation in a short period of time, that there are a lot of people, including me, you remember going to McDonald's, for example, and buying a value meal for not $15, but you're still paying it, right? And so it's a mental thing, and people are saying, well, I'm struggling. I was reading these articles in the Wall Street Journal about how people are struggling, but then I look around and say, but actually it's better, but you still hear that narrative. What is it, if deflation is not the answer, what can snap out of that narrative that the media is trying to create? And people are, to be fair, still kind of feeling like, hey, I'm struggling because I'm paying $15 for a McDonald's.
By that, I would say you have to get government smaller, right? You kind of outlined it itself. The fact that we have $15 Happy Meals or $15 combo meals at McDonald's is in part because government is spending so much money, and then you have monetary policy that's monetizing such debt. So it's not really about tariffs per se. It's more about, can we get government out of the way? And I bet that if you did that, people's wages would rise. And so, yeah, prices would not grow as fast, but then people's wages would catch up, which would definitely ease the burden of the price increases that we saw under the Joe Biden administration. So you can have relief without going to deflation. I know you may or may not think that might be a relatively big part of the economy, but just think about all those families out there that have mortgages, right? So if you go to deflation, I could see it severely hurting the housing crisis, severely making mortgages worse and more unaffordable. Better for us to make government smaller so that wages can grow, so that innovation can grow, profits can grow, and people have more money to spend on their own to deal with the higher prices.
So speaking of more money to spend, going back to that Charlemagne clip and what we all see when we go to the grocery store, grocery prices, egg prices, which had been killing so many of us, are down 53% since January when Trump took over. That's a great example of the government actually doing something useful to work with the private sector to actually get something in line. As Phil mentioned, I just have to throw this out. We had a big debate on this weekend. Phil wants dramatic deflation. I don't want anything dramatic when it comes to the economy because I think that's just completely destabilizing, and I think markets would overreact and freak out, and I think that would be a very bad thing. But do I want to see prices go down? Yes. I just want to see the cost of goods and services go down because right now I don't understand how anyone is making it. I don't get it at all. Whether it's your insurance bills, your grocery bills, you can't buy a house because the Fed needs to lower inflation rates. Just the list goes on and on. I'm glad we're seeing easing, but we need prices to go down in general, and I think we are on track for that. But then Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to agree. I think you're exactly right. You want prices to slow down so that wages can catch up. But you don't necessarily want deflation, and it's largely because of the debt issue. I mean, take a look at FDR. Last time we had deflation, right, it led to a destabilizing economy that just lasted for, almost 15, 20 years. Other nations like Japan, for example, they don't have hyperinflation. They have almost deflation, and their economy has, frankly, been stagnant. So the question really is it really about prices, or is it about people having more prosperity? And so, my point of view is, well, let's find a way to grow prosperity without increasing inflation. And that is largely saying, let's revise our monetary policy. Let's get government out of the way. Let's reduce all these burdensome regulations, lower taxes, decrease government spending, make it easier to raise a family, run a business, and you'll have more freedom, more prosperity, and the price you see at the checkout or at pump will be severely dampened.
One point that I think was really clear in that Charlemagne interview that I think is so important for us to talk about is your average American, even a pretty well-educated American, does not understand how many tariffs the rest of the world imposes upon us. Everyone thinks when Trump's going around talking about tariffs that this is some brand new punitive thing. No one's ever heard of this. And absolutely not. And Charlemagne, as you could see, shut down his guests. Oh, we can't have a conversation if you're not listening. And no, the point was Charlemagne was ignorant. A guy who actually likes politics, who follows politics, was so ignorant that he didn't even know how to have a conversation on it because he'd never even heard of it. And it's just been a basic policy that most countries of this world have instituted to really penalize the U.S. For decades.
And let me point out, the caller was much more educated on that than Charlemagne was, because he understood the history, where Charlemagne had a few talking points, and once it got beyond that, there was no discussion.
Yeah, I would completely admit that, Charlemagne completely dropped the ball. I mean, what's the whole point of having a debate when you're not ready to debate the facts in and of themselves? But when it comes to things like tariffs, I do see a kernel of the truth in that conversation, right? And it's that yes, you're exactly right. Other countries do impose tariffs, but tariffs are not paid by foreign governments. They're paid by the people themselves. So if Vietnam wants to put a 50% tariff, on shoes, that's on Vietnam. That doesn't necessarily hurt Americans because the Vietnamese will have to pay for it. A great example I can think of would be Argentina, before their great president, economist Javier Milei took office. In Argentina, they had decided to put in tariffs on electronics so absorbently high that it was actually cheaper to fly out of Buenos Aires, fly to Miami, stay there for 3 days at a local hotel, buy the most recent or updated iPhone. It was cheaper to do that than it was to buy an older iPhone in Argentina. And that was simply because the amount of taxes, the amount of tariffs that they put on electronics. And so I would have the argument of saying tariffs are definitely a part of trade policy, but I don't really think that they should be on political currency. By all means, put a tariff on China in order to protect national security interests. Fine, I understand that. But let's say you want to punish France for tech regulation, you want to win Midwest votes, all those political reasons for putting on tariffs. I think it sets a bad precedent because Trump's not going to be in office forever. And if there is eventually another Democrat in office that decides they want to follow on that same trajectory, but do it for completely different reasons, they now have justification due to, President Trump making tariffs a part of his trade agenda.
Speaking of people being consistent, and you had mentioned Trump's policies were absolutely no surprise. So we want to go in the way back machine to look at an old clip from the Oprah Winfrey Show with Donald J. Trump and Oprah having a little chat about America's position in the world.
You took out a full-page ad in major U.S. newspapers last year criticizing U.S. foreign policy. What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share. Something's going to happen over the next number of years with this country, because you can't keep going on losing $200 billion, and yet we let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country. Kuwait, they live like kings. The poorest person in Kuwait, they live like kings. And yet they're not paying. We make it possible for them to sell their oil. Why aren't they paying us 25% of what they're making?
So, Michael, I just want to get your thoughts on that. And also, one other question that goes along with the tariffs here, which is, can they be a replacement for the income tax? Because that's one of the things that's been discussed with President Trump, and he's saying, well, we could have the external revenue service instead of the internal revenue service, and we could make them, foreign countries pay the freight. Would that be beneficial? Is that even possible?
So thinking about that clip we just played, I'll go on to say, look, at the very least, it shows President Trump has been consistent on this issue. Now, personally, of course, I disagree. I think the entire philosophy that he has on trade is unfortunately wrong, at least when it comes to tariffs. But at the very least, you got to give him, his due. He's been consistent, going back into the 80s and the 90s. With that being said, I think you have to understand the trade balance. When you decide to impose a tariff, somebody has to pay. Now, President Trump is of the belief that, of course, foreign countries pay this, but that's not necessarily the case. If you're thinking about goods like textiles or clothing, where a business frankly can't afford to put a tariff and eat it themselves because they have such small margins, they might be more than likely to push that cost onto the customer. And if that's the case, that's actually what we've been seeing in a couple of industries, at least a couple of industries here in the United States. So I still do consider that problematic. But to get to your larger question about, can you replace the income tax with tariffs? Well, I would say theoretically, yes, you can do that. And I would say that's because, for the long history of the United States, we didn't really have a permanent income tax until 1913. All before that, most revenue that came into the federal government was due to import tariffs from other countries. So it most certainly is possible. Will it actually happen? I think that there's one key ingredient that you need to have. You have to get government smaller. One of the reasons why the U.S. government was able to operate by operate with tariff revenues and no income tax was because it was roughly a tenth of the size that it is today. So if we're going to be doing something very similar in the near future, I would say that it is only sustainable if you get government right size, and it has to be drastically smaller than what we're dealing with today. With the income tax, you saw a massive growth in tax revenues, and then, of course, a massive will to spend it. You have to do the exact reverse if you want to get tariff revenues to replace the income tax.
Well, Michael, thank you for that. And what I want to tell you is, as much as I would love to see my, $5 McDonald's meal, I would much rather see exactly what you're saying, which is making government smaller and dramatically shifting monetary policy. So thank you so much for sharing that with our viewers. And I'll also add that even though I am literally the biggest Trump fan ever, because I was a supporter back then in 1988, and that's been documented, I also have owned a couple of 80s era GM cars, and I know how the quality was not great when they had these so-called voluntary import restrictions and whatnot that were supposed to make American companies more competitive. And what burns me up is that so many of those American companies sat there and let the foreign companies come eat their lunch. But a lot of it was, as you say, because of government policy, making it so difficult in order for them to innovate and grow and reinvest and pay dividends and everything that we continue seeing today. So your point is very valid. And I hope everybody listening to this show takes that to heart. We've got to make government smaller, and we have got to make sure that we have the ability to compete and grow more so than any other noise that's out there. So tell us where we can find you and follow your work.
Sure thing. So as you know, I'm an economist. I like to stay involved in Kansas politics. That's where I live, smoking meats and playing, of course, in sunflowers and cornfields. But you can find me on X or on Facebook at KS Economist. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us here on the All American Talk Show, and we would love to have you back soon. And I'll be following you on X. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.